Well, I don't know if Janet's into this, but I've got a cup of tea, Janet. And I thought I just watched Mithuna's video um, about light and polarization of light and quantum systems and things. And then I went for a walk. I only watched a little bit of it, and I was thinking about the way physicists talk about the state of a quantum system, and the way I think of systems is there's a kind of cognitive dissonance that I experience, because if I think of a system, I think of some whole which is an interacting sequence, and that there's usually some kind of circular element of causation. That to me is what a system is. So I think of a human, an animal organism as a system, or a cell as a system, or an ecosystem which is full of circular interactions, and a system like that has a kind of teleology. It has certain elements of its behavior are kind of directed towards the maintenance of the system as a whole. So but quantum physicists are happy to talk about a quantum system as being some isolated part on its own. And to me, that just doesn't make sense. I don't know why they use the word system for that. And so because I also use the word system to talk about a laboratory setup. That is definitely a system. And when I see Mithuna with her laser pointer and her reflective screen and her phone, which in a sense is like a measuring device, measuring the amount of light reflected off her little screen that she's pointing it at. And she's in her little laboratory working that system. That is a system to me. So when quantum mechanics starts to talk about to represent the state of the system as a vector in Hilbert space, in other words, one of these Ket vectors, So I stopped because that's the point where I feel like you're not going to get an answer to you're not going to be able to make any progress that way, it seems to me, and I'm kind of out of the conversation from that point on. So I stopped and I went for a walk, and I actually got quite depressed but I was just walking by the river as I usually do, and there was a female coach coaching a boat with eight women and a cox, and the coach was I don't know, it was just her kind of tone of voice. I suddenly there was definitely a live mind there. She was saying something in a way that seemed to me that she really understood something, and she caught my attention, like I don't know, like you see something. And so I listened to her, and then suddenly thought, she's talking about what happens in a laser. So that's the explanation for the part one of this video. Why I was moved to make that, to waffle like I did. And so now I'm thinking, well, let's read along with Richard. My memory of what I'd read in Richard Feynman's QED book is wrong. He doesn't say that Newton used this as an argument for the particle nature of light. But I thought I could just read a bit from page 13 and 14 of Feynman's really excellent little book, QED, The Strange Theory of Light and Matter. And so here we are on page, I'm actually going to have to read 13, 14 and 15. We begin with light. When Newton started looking at light, the first thing he found was that white light is a mixture of colours. He separated white light with a prism into various colours, but when he put light of one colour, red for instance, through another prism, he found it could not be separated further. So Newton found that white light is a mixture of different colours, each of which is pure in the sense that it can't be separated further. The thing, I'm not reading now, I'm talking. The thing that strikes me about this is that when you look at the light from a prism, you do see bands of color, but the colors you see are closely connected to the words that you have, the words we have to describe them. We have a word for describing a peculiar wavelength, which we call blue, and a word for describing a peculiar wavelength we see as green. And then we have a load of nuanced and not very clear ideas about the colors between green and blue, which result in ridiculous arguments, people having the most amazing arguments about whether something is green or blue. When we see the pure tones, we don't have any trouble. It's only when we see the tones in between, which we don't have words for. And I actually think that's an important thing to remember. If you think about yellow and green, you do get quite a lot of fruit in trees which is yellow, And a lot of trees have green leaves. And the reason they have green leaves is more to do with photosynthesis. And you might say that the reason the fruit is yellow is more to do with maybe it's sugars and proteins and ripening processes, because most fruit, when it is green. Before it matures and ripens, it's green, and then there's the system of the plant changes the fruit. It becomes ripe and sweet usually, and yellow. And within an ecosystem, in a way, because animal behavior is so closely tied to the way plants reproduce in an ecosystem, animals that can distinguish the fruit from the leaves and see the fruit will take that fruit and spread the seeds. So you can see that there's actually there's a system there in the sense I was talking about earlier of cycles of cause and effect, which go towards maintaining that ecosystem. The animals are needed to move the seeds around, and the trees are needed to provide food for the animals. And it's easy to abstract a mechanism in there, and then it's easy to see that most of the things that go on in a healthy ecosystem are parts of the kind of process of creating that ecosystem as whatever it is. I've made that far too long, just from one paragraph of Feynman's book. But the point I'm coming to is that maybe our words actually have a biological root, and maybe even the particular way our eyes respond to different wavelengths also comes from that process. So in a sense, there's a sort of psychophysical reason. And psychophysics is, I think that's the term. I only heard the term. I didn't know it was a thing until a month ago. Who was it I was reading about? It was something in Poincaré had. Was it somebody that Poincaré referenced? I can't remember. I'll have to look it on my blog. But psychophysics is kind of the study of the human response to physical systems. And for example, our ability to discriminate weights varies depending on the absolute weight of the object. It's very hard for us to tell the difference between a block of steel that weighs 1 ton and a block of steel that weighs, this is an extreme example, 1.5 tons, because we can't actually affect either of them really any differently. They both weigh too much. But when it comes down to whether something is 1/4 of a gram or 1/8 of a gram is also difficult to ascertain by touch. So, but there are weights in between where it's very easy to distinguish something that's twice or half as much again in weight. You know, if it's about 1 pound, you can tell very easily tell the difference between something that weighs 1 pound and something that weighs 1.5 pounds. So Psychophysics is kind of a mapping of physical units onto our ability to discriminate, and that's ultimately a question of our biology. And as human beings, we are able to design laboratory apparatus to transcend those kinds, and arguably the ability to accurately weigh masses is actually another whole system that we've developed. So we've kind of changed our psychophysical environment, and when we're behaving like scientists, we make judgments that are more connected with our instruments than with our bodies. So in a way, we've kind of transcended our biological limitations, and we're now living in this kind of world where we get our knowledge of the world through rational thought processes acting on. But we need those instruments. We have factories, although we tend to forget about it, but we need factories to make the scales that are able to measure these weights. I know you can go and you can order them on Amazon, and somebody will send you a balance that's capable of weighing, fractions of a milligram. But you have to remember, somebody knows somebody knows what are the good brands of balance. Some of them are going to be nonsense and not going to work. So you've got to not only know the good brands, but at the next level, somebody's got to know how to make those things reliably on a production line so that they are, on the whole, reliable scales. And there's another system there that you need to think about. So, crumbs, this is a massive diversion. Psychophysics. So the names of colors probably have a kind of psychophysical origin, and they may be even, I don't know, our ability to talk about things and give them names must depend in some sense on what we can visually discriminate. So what I was trying to say is that what you call a pure color, when Newton was doing his experiments, what he called pure red could not be separated further. But also, if he took one of those shades of color halfway between blue and green, he would find that couldn't be separated further either. So it's not just that those are the shades that we have the words for. But what we call pure is related, what we call a pure color is surely related to because if you mix light if you have two lights, one, let's imagine you had some way of taking sunlight, passing it through a prism, and then just collecting part of the spectrum, maybe using fiber optic cables. And if you collected some of the light from the pure blue and you collected some of the light from the pure green and mixed them together, you could probably produce a color which would be, if you then projected that onto a surface maybe which somehow scattered or mixed them, you would presumably see something quite close to one of the colors in between the two. And if you put them through another prism, they would again separate. But if you took the light from just the greeny blue part of the spectrum, you would not be able to get that to separate. So within our eyes, we have that space is the mapping from the physical to the psychophysical scale is not one to one. It's many to one. There are distinct physical things that produce the same sensation, and you also see that in all those experiments with, if you take a yellow square on a blue background, it's hard to judge the difference between a different color square on a different color background. The yellow square will look just as yellow as another color square on another background, that kind of thing. So when Newton talked about pure colors, if he did, you need to think about what it means. And so let's carry on reading Feynman anyway. Oh, what a disaster! What a lot of waffle. So, in fact, a particular color of light can be split one more time in a different way according to its so-called polarization. This aspect of light is not vital to understanding the character of quantum electrodynamics, so for the sake of simplicity, I will leave it out, at the expense of not giving you an absolutely complete description of the theory. This slight simplification will not remove in any way any real understanding of what I will be talking about. Still, I must be careful to mention all of the things I leave out. When I say light in these lectures, I don't mean simply the light we can see from red to blue. It turns out that visible light is just a part of a long scale that's analogous to a musical scale in which there are notes higher than you can hear and other notes lower than you can hear. The scale of light can be described by numbers called the frequency, and as the numbers get higher, the light goes from red to blue to violet to ultraviolet. We can't see ultraviolet light, but it can affect photographic plates. It's still light, only the number is different. We shouldn't be so provincial. What we can detect directly with our own instrument, the eye, isn't the only thing in the world. If we continue simply to change the number, we go out into X-rays, gamma rays, and so on. If we change the number in the other direction, we go from blue to red to infrared, heat waves, then television waves and radio waves. For me, all of that is light. I'm going to use just red light for most of my examples, but the theory of quantum electrodynamics extends over the entire range I've described, and is the theory behind all these various phenomena. Newton thought that light was made up of particles. He called them corpuscles. And he was right, but the reasoning that he used to come to that conclusion was erroneous. So he doesn't say what Newton's reasoning was. It's presumably in his optics. We know that light is made of particles because we can take a very sensitive instrument that makes clicks when light shines on it. And if the light gets dimmer, the clicks remain just as loud, there are just fewer of them. Thus, light is something like raindrops. Each little lump of light is called a photon, and if the light is all one color, all the raindrops are the same size. The human eye is a very good instrument. It takes only about 5 or 6 photons to activate a nerve cell and send a message to the brain. If we were evolved a little further, so we could see 10 times more sensitively, we wouldn't have to have this discussion. we would all have seen very dim light of one color as a series of intermittent little flashes of equal intensity. Well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I think you need to think about the actual response of these rods and cones in the retina and how they work. But you could just say, yeah, of course, he means pure light, not kind of mixed light, which is some photons of some wavelength and others of another. But the really interesting bit, I don't know if I should make this video is kind of a mess, isn't it? You might wonder how it's possible to detect a single photon. One instrument that can do this is called a photomultiplier. And here I'm going to show you the figure 1. A photomultiplier can detect a single photon. So there's one photon which ejects electrons using the photoelectric effect, or because of the photoelectric effect. And these electrons are then attracted to a plate B, where they cause the emission of a whole lot more electrons, which then fly onto a plate C. And I'll describe briefly how it works. When a photon hits a metal plate A at the bottom, it causes an electron to break loose from one of the atoms in the plate. One of the atoms. The free electron is strongly attracted to plate B, which has a positive charge on it, and hits it with enough force to break loose 3 or 4 electrons. Each of the electrons knocked out of plate B is attracted to plate C, which is also charged, and their collision with plate C knocks loose even more electrons. This process is repeated 10 or 12 times until billions of electrons, enough to make a sizable electric current, hit the last plate, L. This current can be amplified by a regular amplifier and sent through a speaker to make audible clicks. Each time a photon of a given color hits the photomultiplier, a click of uniform loudness is heard. If you put a whole lot of photomultipliers around and let some very dim light shine in various directions, the light goes into one multiplier or another and makes a click of full intensity. It's all or nothing. If one photomultiplier goes off at a given moment, none of the others goes off at the same moment, except in a rare instance that 2 photons happen to leave the light source at the same time. There is no splitting of light into half particles that go different places. I want to emphasize that light comes in this form, particles. It is very important to know that light behaves like particles, especially for those of you who have gone to school where you probably told something about light behaving like waves. I'm telling you the way it does behave, like particles. So now if you, excuse me, coughing, if you go to page 120, it's a real eye-opener. This is after having described informally a lot of the mechanics of this path integral formulation of quantum electrodynamics. However, before I finish this lecture, I would like to make a few additional remarks. One can understand the spirit and character of quantum electrodynamics without including this technical detail of polarization, but I'm sure you'll all feel uncomfortable unless I say something about what I've been leaving out. Photons, it turns out, come in 4 different varieties called polarizations that are related geometrically to the directions of space and time. Thus they are photons polarized in the x, y, z, and t directions. Perhaps you have heard somewhere that light comes in only two states of polarization. For example, a photon going in the z direction can be polarized at right angles, either in the x or y direction. Well, you guessed it, in situations where the photon goes a long distance and appears to go at the speed of light, the amplitudes for the z and t terms exactly cancel out. But for virtual photons going between a proton and an electron in an atom, it is the t component that is the most important. In a similar manner, an electron can be in one of four conditions that are also related to geometry, but in a somewhat more subtle manner. We call these conditions 1, 2, 3, and 4. Calculating the amplitude for an electron going from point A to point B in space-time becomes somewhat more complicated because we can now ask questions such as, what is the amplitude that an electron liberated in condition 2 at point A arrives in condition 3 at point B? The 16 possible combinations coming from the 4 different conditions on an electron can start in at A, and the 4 different conditions it can end up in at B are related in a simple mathematical way to the formula for that A to B I told you about. But I haven't read that bit because we're now at page 121, so we've skipped 107 pages. For a photon, no such modification is necessary. Thus, a photon polarized in the x direction at A will still be polarized in the x direction at B, arriving with the amplitude P A to B. So, the reason that I wanted to read that and page 13 about basic polarization idea, and page 120 about the QED idea, is that it's actually those photonic interactions that are going on inside a photomultiplier all the way up the cascade. And the reason that I wanted to talk about the boat is I still haven't found a good description of a laser. But in order to get coherent light out of a laser, you have to build quite a complicated instrument, and there's an enormous amount of physics that has to happen inside the laser in order for you to get a coherent beam out, which will exhibit these quantum effects, especially if you're doing it with beam splitters and things like that split the beam, so that instead of just filtering through a Polaroid, you are you're splitting the beam. You're diffracting one polarization one direction and another direction by passing it through a Nicol prism or something. It's easy to forget about all these things and talk about the quantum system as being just a vector in Hilbert space, just a complex number for the case of a photon. But and the physicists would say you lose nothing by doing that. But I have a feeling that what you lose is the coherence of the system as a whole, and what you lose is the meaning of the measurements. But it's very hard to explain why. Which is a good reason to do Mithuna's course, she's offering a live course sometime in November, December. And it sounds really great. So I think I'll end the video there. I was going to draw something with my purple pen, but I've talked way too much now. I'm kind of tired. And on another video earlier, I mentioned Mithuna's video fits in rather well with that as well, because she emphasizes the cos theta term that appears. One way to think of the scalar product is as the cosine of the angle between the two vectors. So that connects, which I haven't read again. I want to understand properly Witter's argument about the amount of information you need to discriminate between, to effectively discriminate when you're given a kind of statistical distribution. Because again, the process of measurement and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is very closely related to your ability to discriminate. If you want to measure the position of a particle accurately at a certain time, when it passes a detector, for example, it becomes very difficult to measure its velocity. And you can, that's almost a statistical consequence of the way Fourier transforms work. And the way you produce a group of waves from a superposition. But just looking at a quantum system as a vector in Hilbert space seems to me to be kind of part of the problem. Why it's so hard to connect these other ideas together, because there's a stage in which there's a language for talking about quantum systems, in quotes, which just to me doesn't seem expressive enough to explain what you want to explain about the phenomena. And I think after one more thing I'll put up. I didn't realize that, or I had forgotten that now I've forgotten her name. Vandana Shiva did a PhD in physics, and actually I read the other day that her topic was on locality and hidden variables. So that should definitely be. I really want to watch this. She's done some interview where she was talking about quantum thinking. Maybe I should just look up a bit about her PhD. And then watch the video. Because it seems to me like you hidden variables in a whole system are going to be non-local. That's just the intuition that I get. They like these stationary points in an ecosystem where you will find certain regularities in an ecosystem, and they're produced by multiple chains of cause. You when you want to alter one of them, it's going to be hard to find a particular place in the system that you must change in order to change that effect. You know, if you go to a tropical rainforest and say, right, we want to change the amount of potassium in this ecosystem in some way, it's going to be very hard to say what it is that you should change in order to get that to happen. And likewise, it's actually very hard to say what it is, how you're going to measure the level of potassium in a rainforest. What do you measure? Do you measure the soil? Do you measure the leaves on the trees? Do you measure the bark, the wood? Do you measure the water? But we know that certain minerals are not imported or exported from a forest, that these certain essential minerals and nutrients are continually recycled. But I suppose that that's actually a deduction about the knowledge of other biology. I'm waffling. I've lost the plot completely. I'll still upload this. It's a fairly natural state of mind when I woke up at 5:30 this morning, and it's now, I don't know, 10 o'clock or something. But that was a great video, Mithuna. Thank you. Really, really is good. It's brilliant.